Many people impressed by Turing's reasoning as a contribution to our understanding of the mind have taken seriously the idea that perhaps machines either can think now or sometime in the future will be able to think. And that view, the idea that there could be thinking machines, at least is not susceptible to the charge of chauvinism. That is, somebody who thinks there could be thinking machines does not have to hold that you've got to have gray matter or white matter or a combination of the two in order to count as having a mind. So they won't be chauvinistic in the way that perhaps Armstrong seems to be. But if you take seriously the idea of the possibility of thinking machines, then you might ask, well, what is a good model for understanding the mind? And a typical answer from this camp, as it were, from this style of thought, indeed is the computer. So the Turing test offers the suggestion that if a machine can achieve a certain standard of intelligent behavior, then it has a mind no matter what it's made of, and indeed such a machine is normally thought of nowadays as a computer, and this line of thought ends up being embodied in the contemporary movement, set of research programs, set of technologies that fall into the broad rubric of artificial intelligence. I'm sure you've heard that term before. Artificial intelligence is an enterprise spanning computer science, philosophy, linguistics, psychology, and neuroscience, and it's dedicated to the creation of intelligent machines. And artificial intelligence, or AI, comes in two distinct forms. First of all, what you might call weak artificial intelligence. Secondly, what you might call strong artificial intelligence, where weak artificial intelligence says simply, artificial intelligence, from this point of view, says we can learn about the human mind by simulating some of its features on a computer. So, for example, a neural network, a connectionist network, for example, that tried to simulate certain aspects of how neurons work, might say that, for instance, in a connectionist network, we see certain types of learning that are very effective for a machine to whom we're trying, or to which we're trying to teach some language. So weak AI says this can help shed light on the nature of human mentality and the mentality of non-human animals by modeling it, so to speak, synthesizes some aspects of it, and that will allow us to draw conclusions about the nature of mentality by analogy, so to speak. Whereas strong AI says that the human mind just is a kind of computer, and that computers therefore, in principle, can tell us all that we need to know about the mind. In saying that the human mind just is a kind of computer, what you're saying is essentially is the following. There's no difference in principle between my mind and that of a sophisticated computer. My mind has software in it. It's just that my mind runs on wetware as opposed to the hardware that characterizes the machine, but there's no difference in principle. My, for example, knowledge of philosophy or English, the English language, or certain parts of history might just be the instantiation of a program in my particular wetware, and a computer might have the same knowledge, the same capacity instantiated in its hardware. In principle, the differences are relatively trivial. Now, you might wonder whether or not the artificial intelligence community can, if it's in the form of the strong AI view, give us a complete account of the nature of the mind, because, for example, many will agree today that it's possible in principle for a computer to possess cognitive capacities. It seems not as shocking as it might have 50 years ago to talk about a computer as knowing certain things, as deducing certain things, and as remembering certain things. Perhaps now, unlike 50 years ago when we might have used those terms metaphorically, perhaps those are not metaphors anymore, but we actually take them literally. However, you might ask whether passing the Turing test, and the question that we considered before, does indeed guarantee consciousness. Now again, caveat, it's not entirely clear that consciousness is required for having a mind, but it does seem like it's required for having minds at all like ours. It seems a characteristic of our minds in our species and those of nearby species that they have conscious experience, and you might ask why it is that having conscious experience is going to be guaranteed for a creature that is built out of hardware. And just to consult intuitions, you might ask yourself, it's one thing to suppose that a non-human, indeed non-organic creature or entity like a sophisticated machine can respond to potential damage to its exterior by moving away and maybe even emitting some screeches. Intuitively, however, it's much harder for us to take seriously the idea that a machine could feel pain. Think about what it would be like to ascribe, literally ascribe, not just metaphorically, but literally ascribe to a machine the capacity to feel pain. That seems very different from our capacity or our tendency to ascribe to our fellow human beings or non-human animals the capacity for pain. Now, it's just not clear what rests on that intuitive feeling of a difference between machines on the one hand and biological organisms on the other. Somebody might say, at least for the case of pain and qualitative experiential states, we want to be chauvinists. That is, maybe you really have to have white matter or gray matter or a combination of the two in order to have experiential states. Whereas for the case of cognition, perhaps we should not be chauvinists. We should be as liberal as we can. Smart is as smart does or tends to do. As long as you have some physical instantiation that runs that program, that's what it is to have cognitive states. Whereas you might draw a differentiation between the cognitive and the affective. And then likewise, insofar as emotions are a kind of hybrid of cognitive and affective states, for example, to feel angry generally involves both thinking that somebody has done something wrong or inappropriate, while at the same time having that experience of burning inside, the sort of fist-clenching nature of rage. This seems like it's got an experiential or qualitative dimension as well. Then our implication would be, insofar as machines can have cognition but not experience, so too machines can only have the parts or aspects of emotions, namely the cognitive aspects of the emotions, but not any experiences. And if moods are much more experiential than cognitive, so too you'd expect machines to be capable of very minimal or maybe none at all moods. So as we think in a more careful way about what's required for different dimensions or aspects of the mind, we might find that some parts or some dimensions of artificial intelligence seem attractive. That is, it seems that many of us are willing to accept the idea that machines are capable of some aspects of mentality, namely the cognitive aspect. But we're much more resistant to the idea that they're capable of experience, the qualitative aspect of mentality, and we might be able to say, on those points we want to hold our ground, dig in our heels, and say we're going to be chauvinists there. You've got to be made of gray or white matter or both to have those experiences, but liberal when it comes to cognitive states.